Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vice President, Events, EE Times Group, David Blaza.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to the final day of ESC. And now, before I just introduce Jason, I just want to say something about the electric car business. It's been talked about for many years, but there's a lot of things going on in the electric vehicle business right now that all seem to be coming together. The Tesla, a local product, is selling very well. The Nissan Leaf is coming out. If you can actually put down a deposit for a car later in the year. So there's a lot going on in electric vehicles. It's a huge opportunity for our industry. It's not just the cars, it's the infrastructure, the charging stations. There'll be all kinds of new applications, which Jason's going to be talking about. And I think this is a massive growth opportunity for our industry. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Jason Wolf, the President North America for Better Place. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you, Dave. Please roll the video.
Today is a monumental milestone. It's the first time commercial cars actually go on the road, driving at the toughest possible test that you can have. And you'll be able to say that you were there on April 26, 2010, when the first electric taxi actually took to the road in Japan.
The first EV taxis will be able to switch their batteries here. And by switching the batteries, they'll be able to extend the range. The battery switch process takes as little as 60 seconds, and that's much shorter than filling up a regular taxi. Here, we are capable of handling as many as 12 batteries to ensure a constant supply of freshly charged batteries to the EVs. The batteries are charged in a temperature control environment, and that ensures safety, reliability, and efficiency of the batteries.
Most car makers said it was impossible. Today, not only is it possible, it's actually driving in the street, picking up passengers.
It's important to prove our concept in Japan because Japan just doesn't believe in the conceptual thinking only. You have to show things actually works. So it's very important to physically demonstrate what we can do. Well, in Tokyo, taxis represent 2% of the total cars, but they are responsible for 20% of the total emissions. So by eliminating taxi emission, we'll be eliminating a large chunk of tailpipe emissions.
If you have a taxi driver going in Tokyo, every day we've done 30 demonstrations to 30 different people that electric cars are better. And I guarantee you they're going to ask the driver, does this thing really work? And when they say not only does it work better, it's quieter, I actually like it better than my older taxi, you got the ultimate demonstration.
It's really great to be here, and I'm not just saying that to suck up to you. Yesterday, I spent over 5 hours in a congressional hearing in DC, and I only got to speak for 5 minutes about the real issues and the threats that face us in the future. So I guess you can understand that when I have an hour and I have an audience that understands not only the threats but the opportunities and that are working on the opportunities of the future, you can believe me that I'm not just trying to suck up. It's really great to be here. So now that I've finished with my soapbox on DC, let me ask you a question. How do you know when you're at the beginning of a technology revolution that's going to change the future forever? How do you know when it's just at the beginning? When I came to the Valley 15 years ago, I joined the internet, which became a major revolution that changed both communication and commerce forever. Now, I would love to stand here and say, yeah, I knew it. I figured it out. I came here in the early 90s. But the truth was a little more boring. I came here, met with a good friend of mine who showed me something that looked, sorry to say, a little geeky. It was called Netscape Navigator. And this thing was slow and sluggish, and I saw no value whatsoever on day one when I saw this in '94. 15 years later, the world has really been transformed. So how do you know that? How do you take advantage of knowing when you're on the cusp of such a monumental technology revolution? And I think, today I've decided to share a few secrets that allow you to identify the core telltales of such a revolution. And the first thing, of course, is the technology. At the time, it was the internet, but today, it's these connected battery cars that are going to drive transportation and energy in the future. So the first thing is the technology needs to be there. But as most of you know, over time, there's a lot of promising technologies. Personally, I love those segues that don't change the world, even though they might appear to. So the second element that is a must is a sizable market. At the time, of course, it's communication, it's commerce. There was a sizable enough market. Today, the market opportunity is even bigger because we're leveraging that past revolution, but we're looking to transform. When I say we, I don't mean Better Place, I mean all of us here and around the globe. We're looking to transform both the transportation multi-trillion-dollar industry and the energy multi-trillion-dollar industry. So that's the second thing. But there's still a third thing. It's not enough to have a sizable market. There's a lot of great technologies that look like they have a sizable market, but they're missing the third element, which is the demand side. There needs to be an extreme pain or pleasure for us to move to capture that sizable market. And that pain today is pretty apparent with the price of gasoline, what it does to the economy, with the impacts of geopolitical problems that oil creates, and of course, a small thing that we like to debate nowadays called climate change. So if you understand those three key elements, you basically can understand that we're on the cusp of such a revolution. Over 100 years ago, a young entrepreneur called Henry Ford basically symbolized one of these major transformations. That was called the T model. The T model transformed the world forever. And in the process, it changed both transportation and energy. Now, we're 100 and something years later, and if you brought back Henry Ford or you brought back Thomas Edison and you said, here's the 2010 products that are the descendants of your products, here, can you drive them? Can you use them? They would be able to do it today. Which is kind of sad that we're 100 and something years later and they could still operate the inventions they made back then. I'm sure in your industry you would not see anything like that. And as an example, if I brought back Alexander Graham Bell and I said, make a call with this thing, he'd probably run out of the room. And if I gave him one of your Blackberries here and said, send an email, he'd think I'm speaking a foreign language. So, needless to say that where we are today is a transformation that many might be skeptical about, but in our view, and if you listen to those three things, you will see is the telltale of a revolution that's going to transform the future. This is a global, inevitable transition to electric vehicles. We know it's going to happen. We just don't know how fast and where it will happen first. Even in the US, we can see the transformation happening, albeit slower because of the economic conditions here. And I'm not talking about recession, I'm talking about the price of gasoline, which is the true competitor, or it is the incumbent that's being displaced by this new revolution. So even in the US, we have over 20 plug-in cars that are going to be powered somewhat or all by electricity coming just in the next 24 months. That is a good telltale sign, but it's not always sufficient. So what we do is we accelerate that transition on a regional basis by putting in a network and services around that network to enable mass adoption of electric vehicles. Better Place has raised over $700 million in the last 2 years from private institutions. And just this past January, we raised the largest clean tech round, VC round in history, with $350 million. It was a quarter of all VC funding to clean tech in Q1. And the reason is fairly simple. The old transportation model is not about a car, a combustion engine car. It's about an entire ecosystem that has been developed and thrived for 100 years. The new ecosystem that needs to develop in order to compete with the old ecosystem is something that's at the heart of this transformation. If you take an electric vehicle today, with battery technology today, the operational mile, the ability to operate the mile, which is the ultimate usage of this product, is cheaper than doing so with $3 a gallon. It's pretty much competitive with $3 a gallon. However, in most of the developed world, the price of gasoline is at least double that price. So you can understand that if you unlock that blue ecosystem and you access many, many of these miles to take that margin, you can build a very sizable business, because the sizable business in black that you're replacing, and I'm not talking about the automotive industry, I'm talking about the oil industry, is the most profitable. It's not even one of, it's the most profitable industry on the earth for the past at least couple of decades. So how do you unlock that electric vehicle ecosystem successfully? How do you get to mass adoption? There will always be the 1, 2, 3% of any population that are early adopters and that will pay a premium to get new gadgets if they like gadgets, like you guys, or if they're just doing it for the sake of the planet, which is great. So you need to support that 1 to 3%. But how do you make this 80, 90% in a rapid time? You really have to solve 3 things for the consumer and 1 thing for the energy grid. On the consumer side, you've got to solve the cost. That mass market is not going to adopt a product that costs more than what they have today. Just not going to happen. If I'm driving my F-150 and it costs me $15,000 or $20,000 and it costs me $200 a month, I'm not going to buy some nice, neat little car that A, doesn't get me what I want to do, hence the convenience. It has to be as powerful and do exactly what I'm used to doing. And it has to have all the functions that I'm used to, like unlimited range. Even though my average drive might still be 40, 50 miles a day, I need my car. When I want to drive up, I assume most of you from the Bay Area, when I want to drive up to Tahoe, I want to do that, even though I might do that only once a year. So you have to solve for the cost, you have to solve for convenience, and you have to solve for range if you want to really break through to the mass market. On the other side, once you've broken through to the mass market, then you might have millions and millions of these vehicles that are drawing a new source of energy called electricity. So that energy needs to come from somewhere, which means you have to have these vehicles networked in a way that supports the grid and doesn't become a threat to it. The way you do that is a comprehensive solution. As I said, we're a network and services provider. So what is the solution that we use to provide these services, and what is that network? First of all, you have the assets that are out and about. These are charge spots at home, at work, in public places like here in the garage. These are places that you can be topped off Wherever a plug-in car comes, it can be topped off. Most of your energy will come at night if you're a consumer. If you're a fleet owner, it might come at your depot. If you're a taxi, you can't charge. You might need to only switch. So the other element is you need switching capabilities, which, by the way, where we talk about how you reduce the cost, once you've taken out the battery and you include it as part of the network, part of the assets that the network operator provides, the cost of the vehicle goes down by a third to a half, because that is the most risky and volatile part of the thing that's called an electric vehicle. It is the technology that is transforming the industry. So we see that as part of the assets. All these assets, charge spots, batteries, switch stations, they all have embedded systems. They all have software. They all have smarts, which is great news for audiences like yourselves. The second category is the ability to manage that entire network. Some of the software is embedded and it manages it locally, but of course, a lot of it has to happen in the back end. What we've, in the recent transition that I made from IT to clean tech, the world in IT has also kind of changed to the new paradigm, talking about the cloud. Behold the cloud. So some of this element has to sit in the cloud and provide services that are human-facing services, like to my iPhone or my smart device to know what my car's charge is, or to schedule a location that I can park at. And some of that are system-to-system communications to make sure that I'm optimizing my usage of those assets. And finally, you have to have the heavy systems that sit on the back office that do enterprise resource planning, that do financial management and billing and reconciliation with utilities and other providers in the supply chain. So you have to have these three elements to provide a comprehensive solution. And of course, I didn't mention, which is the ultimate interface, the thing that really is enabled, and that is the actual vehicle. And this is a picture of the Renault Fluence, which is the car that Better Place ordered 100,000 of them starting next year for two very small markets, Israel and Denmark. And I'll talk later about what we're doing around the world. But that vehicle is a fully connected vehicle that's going to start hitting the road in mass numbers next year. And as you can see, this is not a compromised vehicle. People will have the choice. They will walk into the dealership and say, I want to get a combustion engine Renault Fluence, or I want to get the connected electric one. And by the way, I don't want to pay more, and I want to get a better product. And with a provider like us and an ecosystem like you that brings additional things that we can't even fathom today onto these connected devices, we know that these products are going to be much better, as I can point to my smartphone, than the previous generation of cars. So the key here is connected. And that's something that's very important. Smarts reside everywhere, but there is a network and it's connected. So what is telling me that this is a certain inevitable transition? First of all, a lot of these companies are represented here, actually on both sides, and I assume that over the last few years you've seen in this type of conference some kind of initially peculiar participants. I don't know if 15 years ago or 20 years ago you'd get that many OEMs or auto manufacturers in these types of conferences, but now everything's starting to come together. People are realizing one fact. They're realizing that the future of the car is in collaboration around IT and the vehicle. So, and this is just a sample of the opportunities. There's so many opportunities that are enabled by the fact that you have a smart connected device. And you could probably sit here and lecture me about all these opportunities, but I just provided a few that kind of whet the appetite. And I love Zipcar, and I see how how people that used to keep a car just for the occasional drive using this in San Francisco very successfully. And you couldn't do all these things without IT and communication and smartening up the system. Now, a core component of getting there is these advanced computing platforms that will reside on cars. And that Fluence ZE that you saw there before is the first vehicle that has a full Microsoft OS on board, as well as built on an Intel Atom chip. The package itself, the entire package, is built by a major Tier 1 supplier, Conti, and that, of course, enables us to do a lot of things that Better Place as a provider needs to do, to know how you drive, what's the state of your battery from the battery management system. So all these power electronics now can communicate and let us optimize the energy delivery and the service delivery to you, but it also, allows us to add whatever we want that makes sense for that third major platform. And I'll talk about why I say the third major platform. So, anytime I go to a conference like this, they tell me, you've got some geeks, sorry, in the audience, and probably you're proud of it. And without a Star Trek picture, you're not going to be talking to geeks. But as I said, the third major platform is this connected car. So what are number 1 and 2? PCs. We started with PCs 20, 30 years ago almost. And they are connected devices. Wherever we sit, we work. I can't see you guys that well, so I wouldn't ask the question of how many of you didn't bring a PC. Well, let me ask the question. You can look around. How many of you didn't bring a PC with you here today? Good. The second device, so it may be 10% if I can see correctly. How many of you didn't bring, and I'll go out on a limb here, a smartphone here today? Brought either one of those older phones, or don't be embarrassed. There's special therapy for that. But if I had to ask you, how many of you didn't bring either a smartphone or a computer? Anybody? This gentleman, he should get that prize. By the way, Dave, we need to give that one person a prize. It is very, very hard to see anybody on this planet today that doesn't do either one or both, and most have both, but they might have, for courteous reasons, not brought the second one with them here today. How many of you came by car today? Okay. About 50%, which is good. We're in a major metro, a lot of good public transportation. How many of you don't own a car? Wow. Wow. This is surprising. So we've got someone who doesn't have the first two mobile platforms, but we don't have anyone in the audience that doesn't own a car. So I rest my case about why it's the third major platform, right? So what do cars do? They need to be smart, so they need to think. Today, the extent of thinking is when the car lights up this very annoying check engine light. And then it probably, I'm sure most of you, if I ask this question, and I'm not going to, most of you would know why it's got the check engine light. But for me, it's usually a couple hours later and a few $100s later that I know why. And sometimes it's a loose oil cap or something like that. But the cars need to think, and they need to be smart about what they're doing. People say that texting distracts us from driving. I say it's the opposite. Driving distracts us from what we really want to do, right? From texting. So if cars are smart, they're going to let me text. They're not going to say, listen, you're distracted now because you're texting. And it's crazy today. You drive down the highways, you see these people with this, they drive in the wheel and they're reading, they're texting, and there's mostly men here, so I'll say these are mostly women because they can multitask. We're not that good at these things. So thinking car, communicating car. This is pretty evident today. You know, the extent of my communication in my modern car is my radio. I love it. It's my communication device. As we move forward, these cars are going to communicate in a much, much better way. We'll be able to get all the services. I won't have to sit in those traffic jams because I'll have the choice. I might not drive up 101 from my house in Morgan Hill. I might drive through Santa Cruz because it'll take me the same time and I'll enjoy the scenery. So cars need to communicate. And thirdly, they need to socialize, which is part of our human DNA transferred to our products. And it's usually kind of the highest level of evolution. We kind of personify our products and we give them the ability to socialize. And, you know, you can read this, but my favorite one is when you're standing at the corner, and I will stay politically correct, and you see that cute little Volkswagen Bug, and you want to socialize with it. Okay? And you can use your imagination, what else you can do there. So what has Better Place done so far, and why do we believe that this is a major inevitable transition? We're, of course, operating in various locations around the world. Some of them are more evident, apparently evident why we're there, and some of them are less. But I'll just take 3 examples and talk about them quickly. First of all, Denmark. Denmark was the first live network of managed EVs. This was at COP15 and was great because you get to shuttle around a lot of celebrities. And actually the top left corner is very interesting because that was after one of the harshest winters in Denmark. It was ironic timing for the politicos that got together in Denmark to talk about global warming at one of the harshest winters. And I think, you know, it's nice that God has irony with us sometimes and plays around with us. The other slides you see there are elements of the network controlling, the vehicles, the charge infrastructure, and other things. The other one is the video you saw at the beginning is from just this past week. It's actually on Monday. We launched the first commercial demonstration of electric taxis in Tokyo. And it wasn't the first thing we did in Tokyo. Last year, the government asked us, they saw the technology, they saw what we were doing, and they asked us to come and build in Yokohama City, which is, to the Americans, it's like Detroit. That is the center of automotive innovation. They asked us to come and build a publicly shown switch station. And that's what you see on the top left, where we basically showed, you know, and people were skeptical until that was publicly shown. Even the engineers said, you know, you can't switch a 400, 500-pound device on and on without any kind of failures. It's just impossible to do it. So once we opened that to the public and we had all the teams of 10, 20 engineers from each major company come and start taking pictures and see that this is not rocket science. This is something that we've done in aviation, in other places, many, many times. It's just applied to the automotive industry. The second thing we did, and this is this taxi demonstration that I spoke about, is we took a city that has more taxis than New York, London, and Paris combined, with 60,000 taxis. There are only 2% of the vehicles in Tokyo. But the interesting thing is that they burn 20% of the gasoline, hence 20% of the pollution. So as an example of how important this transition is, it's great to see these things working, and that's what we decided to start with that video and throw you into the water of electric vehicles on the deep end. Finally, Israel, a small country that has probably, arguably the biggest motivation in the world to get off oil. 2 reasons. 1, they don't have any. 2, actually 3, I messed this one up. 2, all their neighbors have oil. And 3, their neighbors are not that friendly in their neighborhood. So if you take 1, 2, and 3, they have tremendous motivation. And it was clear that that was the best place to start back 2.5 years ago to find a partner to showcase that this thing can happen. Because you're going to overcome back to that technology transformation, you're going to have a lot of objections. Anytime, and you can ask the telco industry 20 years ago, anytime you want to make a major shift that's going to change the things are at present. So Israel was a very good, clear target. It also was great because it's fairly small, and if your car happened to go out of range, it really meant it was stolen. So Israel is practically an island from that sense. 2 years later, we have the largest electric vehicle network in the world, which is amazing given the fact that it's such a small country. And by the end of this year, as I said, cars are arriving in mass next year. By the end of this year, we will have a fully operational test of the entire solution. Interestingly enough about that, we're over a year away from those mass cars. We've already got 92 of the largest fleets signed up, which represents over 50,000 cars, plus every month we have 5,000 to 10,000 people go through the visitor center that you see there in the middle and go through an experience. We're in San Jose, two feet away from the tech museum, a kind of tech museum experience where they get to view the problems that are caused by oil dependency, and they can see an actual solution. And at the end of that, you can see on the back of that building, we've got a 1-mile loop that they get to sit in 6 of these Renault cars and take test drives. And it is amazing to see, we were even surprised that about 36% of them are actually signing up for vehicles at the end of the demonstration. So we're a year away, and as I said, in Israel this year we will have over 1,000 charge spots, many vehicles, many switch stations, all working with the software on all the elements and in the back office to test out the system before the mass vehicles arrive. So, where does that put us? Today, I don't know how many of you know this, we've almost crossed the billion car globally number. It's a big number. And we're seeing the impacts on oil prices when the economy just starts to pick up in the last year, and it's we're far away from a great economy. Oil prices have gone up 70% in the last 12 months. Everybody talks about the spike of 2008. But just in the last 12 months, since last April, oil prices have gone up 70%. So imagine what happens if we do have a full recovery. But the question we need to ask is, what does the world look like when you have 2 billion cars? What's that going to do to congestion? What's that going to do to pollution? The resources that we have? Global warming. And the only answer, and that's why I go back to the beginning of those 3 elements that tell us that this is a real transformation that's going to change the world. We have the necessity, mother of all invention. We have the price competitiveness with the incumbent. We have models. Better Place is not the only one, but we have models. We have manufacturers. We have the global community behind this thing. So 15 years from now, when hopefully one of you is standing up here and talking about the next major transformation, it will be kind of like I said with the internet. It will be a no-brainer. Like, you guys in 2010, what, you were stupid? You didn't see that this is happening? It was so clear. You'll basically be standing here, and everything that you have today will be driven by the same electricity that drives your laptops, mobile devices. One last question before I wrap up. How many of you are running your laptop on ethanol or biofuels? or fuel cells. There's a practicality about batteries and driving things with batteries and decoupling the energy creation. And again, I'm not knocking any of those things because they're all needed as part of the global solution. I'm just saying when you look at 15 years, it will be so obvious and make so much sense that it would be good to understand it today, and with people like yourselves that are building the solutions, as I said, the opportunities of the future, there's tremendous amounts of innovation and opportunities out there. Thank you. I have another 25 minutes. I wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, so if there's any questions, I'll actually bring it back to the previous slide. Can I get the previous slide? Yeah. Any questions out there? I can't see too well, but I see one hand there.
Oh, thank you. Does Better Place have any philosophy about what to do with the currently installed fleet of vehicles, recycling, etc.?
We deliberately don't talk about things that are different in each country, which include the current fleet, which include the energy mix as long as it's carbon-free. But personally, when I look at the current fleet of vehicles, I know that there's going to be a big momentum to convert vehicles. That's one way to switch them over. The other way is we know this is not going to happen overnight. So there's going to be a natural, which is about 8 to 9 years between the time a fleet turns over. So I think between the natural recycling, I'm not proposing a scrappage program or a cash for clunkers, but between the natural recycling and some conversions that will happen, there will be a transition over the next couple of decades. Good question.
Jason.
Other questions? Yes.
Jason, I've got a question here.
Just ask it. I can't see.
First of all, great presentation. Can you
Thank
update us on the plans for the build-out in the Bay Area?
Good question. You saw I didn't mention a lot of the U.S. except for saying that cars are coming. Most of the cars that are coming, if you saw my slide, and you'll know, you haven't missed the news, we didn't announce a vehicle for North America, a switchable battery vehicle for North America. We don't announce until we've got all the elements in place. But for North America, we did announce 3 markets. We announced Hawaii and the Bay Area at the end of 2008, and we announced Toronto, Ontario in early 2009. And as you saw with Israel, and we're pretty much halfway through this roadmap, it's about a 3 to 4 year roadmap to put mass electric vehicles. And that means this is not 1,000 or 2,000. This is the capacity to bring tens and hundreds of thousands and the capacity to support millions of vehicles. So in the Bay Area, we're doing very well. We're working with an ecosystem of local governments, other private companies to deploy the network. The reason it might take a little longer than it will take in Israel or Denmark is pretty obvious. You just go outside and you look at the price of gasoline, $3 a gallon, and we talk to our investors. They give us $350 million. They say, I want my money to have the highest return. So is the highest return in a market with $3 a gallon? Or is it in a market with $7 a gallon like Denmark or Israel? So it's a question of resources. We're moving ahead in the Bay Area. We still project to have vehicles in the 2012, 2013 timeframe. But in the meantime, all those vehicles you saw on the second slide, we will build networks, not the switching stations, but the smart networks to support those vehicles. So it's not that we're waiting for the switchables. We will deploy to support the early adopters, the people that are buying these vehicles. We love you guys. It's really important to buy them. We're going to learn a lot about these vehicles, and we'll be able to have some value by the lessons that we learn over the next few years. But once we announce the switchable vehicle for the Bay Area and other US key markets, then we'll see an ability to break it up to anybody who wants to buy one of these vehicles will be able to replace their decision to buy their standard gasoline vehicle at a cost-effective way? Good question. Yes, sorry. The mics, if you want to ask a question, there should be mic runners.
So my question is about what is the per mile cost if you if you charge the electricity with the electricity, and in your case, that includes the cost of the battery if you're replacing the battery as well?
Beautiful question, and by your voice, I don't think you work for Better Place, but it's a great question because this is the key to what I said, why the market is inevitable. The question he's asking is, it costs me today at $3 a gallon, 12 cents a mile to drive. I'm not talking about insurance, I'm just talking about the fuel cost. Costs me today 12 cents a mile. Electricity to drive a mile is about 2-3 cents. The battery, as this gentleman mentioned, is owned by us as a network provider, costs us about 5 to 6 cents per mile. So you can understand that the electricity is not the big cost here. It's not like in the fuel side where you've got 12 cents only for gasoline. So 2-3 cents, 5-6 cents. And then it costs us to operate the network, put the infrastructure in, do all that other side, another few cents a mile. So you get to about the same 12 to 12. And that is also a good explanation of why when you get private investments, you'd rather go to a market where the same 12 E-mile is competing with a 24 or a 30 cent G-mile, gas mile. And that's also why you can understand why we've raised more in clean tech than in Q1. It was more than the total solar industry raised. Because when you can release that gap, that margin, in vast numbers, it doesn't work if you've only got 5 cars on a network. But if you can release that in vast numbers, you've got a business model that allows the distribution of the value chain of transportation. It's not all going to stay with us. Car companies, innovators as well as traditional ones, are going to benefit. For 90 years, they've got the short end of the stick in this industry. Oil companies got 90-something% of the profit, and the car companies had to kind of geek out some profits in some years. In this new world where you have energy, transportation, service providers, there'll be a redistribution of that the value chain pie. So that's a very important question, is that marginal mile is what's so critical. And that's why the US government has also identified that and is doing its best to compensate for the low gasoline price and say consumers get $7,500 in a tax credit when they buy an electric vehicle. California went one step further, which if you are Californians, you should jump on and buy one, because now you get $7,500 from the federal government and $5,000 from the state. That is practically, on a Nissan Leaf, taking it from a $32,000 MSRP to a $20,000 car. It's getting close. So the US government has done a lot to try and bridge that gap to what other countries are doing. But definitely, there's a lot more work to be done. Great.
Yeah, basically, I understand that the future car will be the mobile computer on wheels, right? So mostly it's a mobile computer. But the most important, from a technical point of view, is the mobile. So how to connect the car together is a wireless transmission, wireless network. That's the big issue, because we cannot use in the 3G GSM systems because people have to pay, whatever, a lot of issue there. So my question is, are you going to include the Wi-Fi in each charging station, and then so that the engineer can connect the car each other, whether in the mesh network, ad hoc network there. So that's some countries, like in China. I'm also in charge of national project in China. In Shanghai, we established all the Wi-Fi together with the charging station. So each vendor like your company can connect all cars together through Wi-Fi. So that's a very cost-effective solution. The question. Thank you.
It's a great question, and now you're probably, up until now, you've kind of been yawning and being bored. But this is where where the wheels meet the tar, as to say. You're asking about the communication, which is critical to all these networks. And because of the fact that communication is different in different regions, and you might have in the US, you have utilities that someone might use a mesh network, someone might use 700 megahertz, someone might. So the way we've architected the infrastructure, both on the car as well as on the charge infrastructure and the switch stations, we've architected it in a flexible way that we can switch out the chips to take advantage of the least costly, but still the ones that address your service level agreement. So you have to be good enough, but best cost. And that's why I also recommend that if anybody's building devices, very important to look at that flexibility, because there is a cost to that flexibility. You guys can explain to me exactly how that works, but there is a cost to making the system more flexible and not making it rigid on one design. So yes, we definitely are looking at each locale on how they're working, and we have to optimize to that. And it's a simple optimization, because you've got the cost of the communication, and then you've got the cost of the actual hardware and device changes that you have to make. And it depends on volume, which one is cheaper. So there's not a black or white answer to that. Good question. I like it. We're starting to get deeper into the weeds.
You've got a very impressive solution here for this major paradigm shift. And I'm just curious, less technical question, what type of opposition would you be getting from the petroleum manufacturers, refiners, et cetera?
I love that question, because it's as usually happens in these instances, it becomes kind of two camps. You get people that really understand that this could be either threat or opportunity, and both of them are on the same side, the people that see it as a threat or opportunity, and there's the people that just dismiss it, like most major changes. And I'll give you a great example. Our first major investor in the first round in Israel is a company called Israel Corp. They own the refineries in Israel. They own the largest shipping company, and it's one of the top 10 in the world. This is a major, major conglomerate. And our chairman is actually the chairman of that company. It's his family's business. And they ask him, so, this has the opportunity to displace you. Why did you go and invest in this company? And his answer is simple. He says, if anybody's going to cannibalize my business, it better be me. And to me, that was the best answer. On the other hand, you have companies that might ignore it and say, listen, this is a trend, it's a fad, we've seen it in the 90s, in early 1900s, the electric vehicle tried to make it, it'll never make it, batteries are not dense enough in terms of energy, fuel has 80% more energy, and they go through kind of these ramblings without understanding really the physics or the chemistry. And that's okay, because once things happen, I at the risk of insulting anybody here, but if you had to ask Sony 15 years ago or 10 years ago, if they would have believed that the future of music will be shifted 90% away from them, they would have laughed, and probably did, because it did. So if you would have known that, I asked this question, this audience, that's probably going to be a silly question because you're not as young, but when I go to a freshman class in college, I ask a simple question. I ask, how many of you have ever bought a CD, a music CD? Let's do this here. How many of you have ever bought a music CD? Now, most of you are either raising your hand or not raising your hand and thinking, what kind of stupid question is that? But if you ask the same size audience of a freshman class, you'll only get 2 or 3 people that raise their hand. It stunned me. I didn't expect to see that. And the reason is because why would we buy a CD? We've got digital music. We download everything. Granddad, get with the times. It's silly. So I think it's a little long answer, but it is interesting to see how these reactions to this industry is.
Hello. So I had 2 questions. The first question is about whether you've got modular battery packs. The photo of the battery pack that looked like it might have been very vehicle specific. And the second question was about your statement about the cost of gas around the world. Part of the cost of gas is the cost of manufacturing the gas and distributing it, and the second part is government taxes. So how will government taxes be replaced, which go both to roads and also to the general fund? I can imagine they might want to tax the electric cars more.
I think I'm back in DC with that second question. Actually, both great questions. So to the first question, yes, the structure of the battery today is mostly proprietary to each OEM. Each manufacturer, and this is natural, you guys probably know this very well. Early on in a technology cycle, the leaders, they want that as their core essence. We make the battery better. One does liquid fuel that's blue, another one has air fuel, and each one has their own kind of tricks of the trade. So the first question is, it's not standard, and we don't need it to be standard because that switch station that you saw can support multiple types. Of course, like if you try to drive a minivan or a micro car through a car wash, you're okay, but if you try to drive a bus or a semi-trailer, you're not going to get... So there's a certain limit of how many batteries we can hold in a switch station, but it's not a problem for the first 4 or 5 that come along. Now, you ask, okay, so what happens with number 6 or 7? By that time, we believe there's not a competitive advantage for that company to invest too much in battery technology. They'll go out and they'll buy it standard from A123 or from ESC or whoever. And that's what naturally happens in these markets, because if I'm number 6 and I'm going to spend a lot of money in designing a battery, I'm really losing out the market. Even you look at hybrid, Toyota, even though they have one product of hybrid, they own IP across so many different OEMs that compete with them. But it doesn't make sense for someone to go and develop the new technology. So that's the question about the battery. 20, 30 years out, I believe we'll start to see, like, the AA, AAA, you'll have a 10 kilowatt hour battery, and everybody will use that same 10 kilowatt hour battery. And if you're just doing city commuting, you'll use 1. If you're going to Tahoe, you use 6, and you'll be able to do that. That's my personal belief, but we'll see how long that takes and how that rolls out. To your second question about vehicle taxes, I think that's a beautiful question, because what happens in this new monitored world where everything's connected and everything's calculated, you have the perfect system for governments as well as private. Why do I need to drive into the convention center, have a gate, put in payment, get cards? It's redundant. That's stupidity. When I drive in, everything should be cleared for me. They know how long I've been here. The car knows how long I've been here. It can communicate to the garage. It can transfer the money. I might need to press OK at the end, but everything could happen behind the scenes. The same thing with the government. An interesting point on that is, people talk about, the OEMs and what this type of transition would make. The OEMs today don't get a mileage tax or how much you use their car tax. They get the $1,000 or whatever margin they make up front, and then they try and get as much money as they can from us on services. But I ask this question also a lot. How much money would Ford put to its bottom line every year if they charged only 1 cent a mile for their vehicles? And I just use Ford as an example because I know the numbers. 1 cent a mile from every mile that's driven in a Ford. The answer is about $10 billion to the bottom line. There's no additional cost to generate that. So changing the model of the same value chain, we would be paying the same percentage of our household income on transportation or less, and being able to distribute it in a lot of different ways. Why? Because oil is so much of that value chain. Now, it can't happen overnight, because right now the technologies are evolving very rapidly, so the cost curve on EVs, even though there is a margin, it's going to get bigger and bigger. So the governments that are smart, like in Israel and Denmark, they realize that right now they can provide tax breaks for people that buy electric vehicles. And over time, they can bring those things to comparative prices. And within a decade, it won't matter. They can do the same taxation they have on gasoline today because the price of the components, the batteries, the services, everything around it will be much cheaper than a gasoline vehicle. So I hope that answered your two questions. Got another 6 minutes. Any other questions?
Yes, so now we have another platform, great platform for mobile connectivity. It's great for our business, for our line of work. How do we intend to manage the big brother aspect? Because, or do we care? I mean, we're so connected now, every aspect of our lives is nearly, available to nearly everyone.
That's the short answer. The short answer is we've jumped off this cliff already, and for people, my age, we've seen this, and it's kind of scary how we've gone from anonymity to full. You Google me, you know everything, you can find me. That when I started 15 years ago, that didn't exist. You could be anonymous. Today, it doesn't exist. My iPhone asks me 3-4 times a day. I want to bang it. It asks me, can I allow service XYZ to access my location? So what is going to happen in our view is you're going to have very, very strong APIs around, not only around technology, but around who we are. And those APIs will be carefully managed to say what you can do and what you can't do. I'm not saying that Apple has done a good job or someone else has done a good job, but you'll definitely have these two tiers of APIs, not only technological, but also in terms of information and data. There's a lot of discussions going on, so I don't want to go into too much details. There's discussions between electric companies and Google about the information that's coming from the homes, telcos releasing information to the federal government. Those issues are not solved. The good news is misery loves company. This third platform is no different than the two previous ones. We will solve all of these things over time as society does. Every time there's a transformational technology shift, there are things that lag. Legal structures, regulation, taxation. These are things that will come over time. But I don't have an answer that I know from what we're doing at Better Place is we're making sure that we've hired the best cybersecurity people, the best IT security and systems people, because we know that ultimately, if it's like my kid says to me sometimes, I don't need to learn for that because no one's going to ask me that question. We're going to learn for everything that we can conceive because we know they are going to ask that question. So that's a short answer.
In northern Florida and southern Georgia, there are now Eclipse 500 and Javelin air taxis that are servicing the area because they're not jumbo jets running for 100 miles. I was anticipating that. I also know that the only way that we expand our living residential conditions is with the subdivision. We're locked into the architecture of all of life in the United States with the subdivision.
Yeah.
So I've got 100 acres just outside of Austin for engineers, a 5,000-foot runway down the edge with beautiful lakes. It's really quite pleasant. Nobody needs to own an automobile. Nobody needs to own a house if I can pull it off and finish it. So what can you say to me that's interesting? I would like to have turbine blades on a stick for air conversion to electricity and be able to service electric cars so that people fly in and out from my node to any other node. Don't have to have automobiles on each end. No longer need to own an automobile. So what can you say that's interesting to me?
I bless it. I said, I love Zipcar. Zipcar reduces the number of vehicles on the road. But is it going to work for everybody? Probably not. We've seen over history people try to transform. The hardest thing to transform is not technology. It's people. People do the same things. They like to eat. They like to have fun. They like freedom. So my personal view and our view is we love all these solutions because it can help. It's the same thing as the different fuels. Bring it on, because if we're going from 1 billion potential to 2 billion, if communities like yours can cut that from not going from 1 to 2, 1 to 1.1, brilliant. Bring it on. All those things are great. If you can have 10 community vehicles that are electric vehicles that run there instead of having 1,000, because you've got 1,000 single homes, remember, the mission of Better Place is ending addiction to oil. It was not to go and make a bunch of money. Okay, I think I have time for one last question, although that would be a nice one to end on. Whoever's got a mic, I can't see.
One of the big problems is the cost of the batteries, and if you minimize that, that really impacts the model. I had an idea if you had something from maybe U-Haul, where you go rent a trailer with additional batteries or a generator that you could tow behind for when you go on vacation. So then you get your extension, your mile extension, with the very few days that you need it out of the year, and it would minimize your costs. You could just rent that for a week or a day. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, it's a great idea. There'll be lots of different models. You know, early days where you don't have networks all over the place, you might sign up for a Better Place subscription, and for that once a week that you want to drive cross country, you might get with your subscription a week versus of a hybrid car or something like that. So there's lots of different models that make sense. The important thing is to really look at this as a third platform. And if you realize that today, versus looking back and saying, oh, I knew this was inevitable, like a lot of people like to do. Oh, the meltdown of the housing market, it's clear. We all knew that, right? But somehow we didn't do anything. So this is the third platform. We need definitely your help to accelerate the time to it, and in the process, there's tremendous opportunities for everyone. Thanks.
Jason, that was terrific.
Thanks, Dave.